Hello, everybody, and welcome to One Question with Pastor Adam. And I am Adam, and I am pastor to believers and to doubters, to unfaithful Christians and faithful atheists. And friends, Jesus wasn't afraid of questions, and neither are we here at One Question. So we are going to go over the questions. If you have questions and you'd like to send them to me, you can do that over social media. And obviously, you can put any questions you may have in the chat section here. So, Pastor Adam is a product of the Raven Foundation, and you are. We're always here. I think we're always here at 11 o'clock on Thursdays. So we'll see how it goes. So welcome everybody. And if you're listening on iTunes or wherever you listen to Stitcher or wherever you listen to your podcasts, thank you for being here. And today, everybody on the show, we're going to talk about our third session on myth and gospel. Is the Bible just another myth? This is our third episode. We've talked about comparing Romulus and Remus in the founding of Rome to Cain and Abel and the founding of the first city in the Bible. We've talked about, what else have we talked about? Resurrection. Last week we talked about resurrection and the myths of resurrection and how they are similar and different to Jesus's resurrection. And today, I want to talk about two things, creation and also the gods of wine. I love it. I love it. Oh, Jesus turns water into wine. And did you know that there are other gods who turn water into wine? Oh, it's so good. Yeah, Jessica, more mythology. Let's go. What do you got there? What? I can't tell what that emoji is. Is that a, I don't, somebody let me know what that emoji is. That's it's good stuff. So everybody, here we go. Creation stories. Many of you have heard me talk about creation stories in the past. So for some of you, this is going to be nothing new for you. But I love the creation story in the Bible for reasons that it's a mermaid. Oh, Jessica sent the mermaid. I was like, is that a unicorn? Or I'm going to have to get up close and personal with the mermaid. That just sounded weird. I'm sorry. Mythical creatures in the mermaid. I love it. Thank you for that, Jessica. Awesome. So I love the creation story in the Bible, often because we tend to take it literally. There's all these like debates about whether the authors of the creation story were like, hey, you need to take this literally, or if they were talking metaphorically about creation and how we should understand the creation story today. I think those questions, whether you take it literally or metaphorically, scientifically, or whatever, I think they kind of miss the point. A lot of the conversations around Genesis chapter 1 miss what I think is the crucial point about the story, which is, who is this God that we're talking about? What is this God like? Because there have been creation stories told throughout the world, and they all tend to follow a similar pattern. And that pattern, one of those pattern is an ancient story from the Babylonian Empire. And it's typically thought that the ancient Jews finally wrote down their creation story while they were in the midst of the Babylonian exile. And just a little bit of history here. Bear with me. I'm not going to take you all the way back to high school history and have you fall asleep. So just stick with me here a little bit. The the ancient Jewish people at this time, they're living in the nation of Judah. So they're not Jewish at this moment. They're Judahites. That's the technical scholarly term. So if you want to impress anybody when you're talking about ancient Jews, call them Judahites. And they'll be like, what? And you can explain to them they lived in the nation of Judah, and they had different religious practices than our Jewish siblings do today. It's a different religions. Our Jewish siblings grew out of the Judahites and the Judahite religion, but it's different back then. And anyway, they get conquered by the Babylonian Empire, and the Babylonians are destroy Jerusalem. They kill many of the people there, and they take others out into exile in the Babylonian exile. And so this is when the Judahites start writing down their own creation story. But while they're out in the Babylonian exile, they hear the Babylonian creation story. You can read about it in the Enuma Elish, easily findable online. And in the Babylonian creation story, there are two gods, and the mother god and the father god. And the mother god is named Tiamat. And Tiamat and the father god end up having children, and then end up having grandchildren. And the teenage gods, as they grow up, they become teenagers and they get a little loud. They're playing their music too loud down in the basement, and the parents can't sleep. Does this sound familiar to any of you? So I love that joke. That's pretty funny. So the parent gods are like, well, we've got to stop the children gods. So they try to do that. And then the teenage gods are like, oh, our parents are so oppressive. And so anyway, they end up going to war. So the teenage gods, the children gods, they end up uniting against Tiamat and their father, and they end up killing their father. Tiamat gets all kinds of pissed off because now her husband is dead. And Tiamat's like, okay, it's time. We're going to war against my children. And so Tiamat gets this general named Kingu, is her general, and they go to war against the children god, and they end up like defeating the children gods. And then one hero from the children god rises up. His name is Marduk. And Marduk is like, hey, I will lead all of you in a war against our grandparents and parents. And if you will honor me as your one true God, is the true God, the ultimate God of all of you when we defeat our children, our parents. So they're all like, yeah, sure, let's do that because we want to play our loud music. so so they go up against Tiamat. They end up capturing Tiamat and killing her. They end up killing the general Kingu, and Marduk is the hero in all of this. And they end up cutting Tiamat's body in half, and out of her body they end up creating the dome in the sky, and out of the other part of her body they end up creating the earth, and then out of Kingu's blood they end up creating humans. This is the Babylonian creation story. If you look at other creation stories throughout the world, you will find something fairly similar to that. It's a creation story that is, on one hand, very entertaining. If we were to make it into a movie today, it would be rated R and for graphic violence. And on the other hand, it tells a story. As we've talked about in the past couple of weeks, one of my favorite people on this is Walter Wink, who calls this the myth of redemptive violence. These are myths or stories that humans have told that cross cultures, and they end up telling a similar story about how the world works, and how the world was formed. It's formed out of cosmic violence, cosmic war between the gods. And the fundamental story that it is telling is that the world is evil, and meant to be evil. This is just how it is. Uh, and out of this violence, the world is formed. And so violence is the way of the world. And you can see how, I think I mentioned last week when we were talking about similar myths, you can see how how somebody would come to understand these stories, right? That how they would come to start telling these stories. The world is a, a fairly violent place. It feels like a violent place. Even in the ancient world, and even today, if you like, a lot of the news that we hear today is centered around the myth of redemptive violence. What's the way in order to get ahead in this world? Step on your neighbor. Get ahead in the world by putting your neighbor down, putting someone else down so that you can feel so we can feel better about ourselves. This is the way that oftentimes we fall into on personal levels in our families and in our neighborhoods, and also on national levels as well. Uh, so there you go. And here is where the Genesis creation story makes so much more sense to me, right? When you hear that background, and the other myths that we've told about Cain and Abel, and some of the other ones, here you see something different happening in Genesis chapter 1. This is no longer a scientific account of how creation was uh, was formed in a literal 6 days or whatever. This is a different kind of story. Creation comes about not through cosmic violence, in order to justify more violence in our world. It comes about through peaceful speaking the world into existence, right? There is no cosmic battle. It is God saying, let there be light. And there's light. Hey, how about that? So if you are like, I'm just like, I always like think of myself, if I'm in the ancient Babylonian Empire and I am hearing these upstart Judahites that we've just conquered, telling their story. I'm like, what? This is boring. Where's the cosmic battle? Where's the truth about the violence that is in the world today? And the the ancient Jewish storytellers are like, uh, actually, this is not how the world is supposed to be. God creates, not out of evil divine bodies, goddesses, and generals, but out of a sense of gift giving, out of a sense of goodness. This is what the world is supposed to be like. And you notice, like, even in the story of the humans, where it says that God created them male and female in the image of God, God created them. Even that is so radical when you hear it against the backdrop of the Babylonian creation story, because it is universal. The ancient Jewish storytellers here are saying something so radical at the beginning of the Bible that we often miss because we don't think of them writing this in the Babylonian Empire. What they are saying here is that all humans are created in the image of God. This isn't just us, right? This isn't just us and our tribe that are special and created in the image of God. Even the this is the brilliance, and also the, I don't know what to call it, the difficulties of this creation story, is that, hey, even those Babylonians, those jerks who just conquered us, even they are created in the image of God. Even our enemies are created in the image of God. I mean, that is like, it's on the one hand, that is so beautiful and awe-inspiring for me, and also it's like goes against everything that's inside of me. Do you know what I mean? Like, my enemies are that special too, are created in the image of God. I mean, this is like, this is where I want to say that the Bible was written by human beings trying to figure out what God is doing in the world. And oftentimes, especially after this beautiful creation account, uh, you get it wrong. I have a I have a Jewish friend who's much older than I am, but I meet him at conferences frequently, and he teaches English and also Hebrew at Purdue University in Indiana. He recently retired. Uh, Wonderful man, but he told me once that after so in the creation story, everything is good, and God is the giver of all good gifts. And then after you have what Christians call the fall, um, uh, my Jewish friend says, after this, not trusting in God and the goodness of God and eating the forbidden fruit, this is what this is really about, he says. He says, after this, we no longer trust in the goodness of God. We no longer trust that God has given us all of these things as a free gift, and we think that God is like holding stuff back from us. And you can no longer trust God and the good gifts of creation. And so after this, we are blinded to seeing the image of God in one another. And we start pointing fingers and we start thinking that God is on our side and that the image of God doesn't reside in the Babylonians or in people of other religions, other nations. And so you start dividing the world up into who is good and who is evil. That's what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is all about. It is our propensity to divide the world up into who is good and who is evil. Whereas God creates and it is good. God creates humans and it is very good. Even in the image of God, we are created. But then we think we know what is good and what is evil. And that's where we start dividing the line between good and evil, and putting people on sides. Um, so whereas Alexander Solzhenitsyn, this guy who survived Nazi Germany, right? He ends up saying that the line between good and evil runs down the middle of each of us. And so a lot of like, sometimes I'm seeing this more and more, that oftentimes what the things that we point our finger at out there in the world that we proclaim are evil are often just projections of our own tendencies towards evil, towards trying to divide the world up into who is good and who is evil. And it's all very complicated. But the creation story with this backdrop, I think, is just so powerful. And so throughout the Bible, um, you get humans who are writing the Bible, trying to figure out what God is doing in the world, and the 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 baseline for it, I would love to say, is kind of this creation story in Genesis chapter 1, where God's intention is to be the giver of all good things, the giver of creation. And how do we live into that? How do we see that acting out in the world? And oftentimes we fail to do it. And much of the Bible is about our failure to live into that vision where all humans are created in the image of God. So uh, there's like the myth of the Babylonian creation story and the story or myth of Genesis chapter 1, right there. So also in the ancient world, if you were to look for the image of God, you would primarily look to the pharaohs, the emperors, the Caesars, who proclaimed that they were the image of God or even the son of God, right? The ancient Egyptian god Ra was seen through the pharaoh, right? This is the son of God. And that was typical in the ancient world. The Caesars, the emperors of Rome, all claimed divinity by saying that they were the son of God or the image of God. And so if you were to be in the ancient Babylonian Empire and you wanted to see the image of God in the world, you would look to your king. But here comes these Judahites, these ancient Jews, and how do they tell this story? Well, all humans are created in the image of God, not just the emperors, not just the kings, but also the poor, the weak, the marginalized. What the Hebrew scriptures end up saying are the widows, orphans, and aliens, the immigrant in your midst, the the those who I would prefer we call undocumented immigrants. Others want to call them quote illegals. That just like puts shivers down my back. So dehumanizing of other people. But the Bible is insistent. Widows, orphans, and aliens, meaning immigrants in your midst, are created in the image of God and should be treated as such, right? I mean, this just going off a little bit here. Here in the United States, our labor industry, our economy is messed up. I'm going to say that first. And it's so messed up that it depends on undocumented immigrants for much of our labor, our food production. And so what we do here in the United States is we demand labor from undocumented immigrants, and then they come over and perform that labor, and we scapegoat them. We call them illegals. It's just this vicious cycle that our economy is in, and our culture is in. I mean, we've got basically one party who wants to keep the economy the way that it is, dependent upon undocumented labor, and then scapegoat the undocumented labor. And the Bible is here to tell us that you must treat the aliens, the immigrants in your midst, as if they are treated, as if they are made in the image of God, because that's what the Bible says they are, right? In Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, it says, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then in Leviticus, just a few verses later, 1934, I believe it is, says, love the immigrant as you love yourself. So Leviticus here is expanding who you think your neighbor is, right? From your Jewish neighbor, your neighbor who worships like you and lives like you, to the immigrant neighbor who may not look like you, who may not even worship like you, but is in your midst. They need to be loved too. And so when Jesus gets to the point where he's talking about the Good Samaritan, this is the stranger in your midst, the person who worships a little differently from you, who is from a different place, who might look a little differently from you. And he's asked, Jesus says, the whole point of this is to love your neighbor as you love yourself, right? And somebody comes to him and says, well, who is my neighbor? And Jesus says, the one who you dislike, right? The one who is different from you, is also your neighbor and deserves to be loved. This is the image of God seen in all people and deserve to be treated as such. So you don't get that in the Babylonian creation story. But you do get that radical subversion of the human propensity to divide the world up into who is good and who is evil, who is created in the image of God and who isn't. Or maybe you could even say who has a little more of the image of God in them and who has a little less of the image of God in them. There's nothing like that in Genesis 1. You're created in the image of God, and all humans deserve to be treated as such. So there is the creation stories, the differences and similarities there. Oh, I love this. Is fun. I'm having a good time. I hope you're having a good time too. So the second story, and I'll conclude with this story, and then we'll get to some comments and questions. This story is the Dionysus story. Uh, you can read about it in the play The Bacchae. The Bacchae is the other word for Dionysus. This is the god of wine in the ancient Greek world, the god who introduces wine into the world. And hey, we all love wine. I don't know if you love wine, but I'm a fan. The Bible is a fan of wine. God is often talked about as a vine grower for wine in the Hebrew scriptures. My favorite passage in the Hebrew scriptures is probably Isaiah chapter 25, where Isaiah says that God is making a party on the mountain of God, and there'll be rich food, and the best wine is going to be there, and everybody's invited. People from all nations are going to be coming. Everyone's coming, and the shroud that blinds us is going to be destroyed, and we will see the world, and we will see God. We will see one another for who we truly are, and there's going to be wine, and there's going to be rich food, and it's going to be a party. So wine is a theme throughout ancient Palestine, actually, ancient Palestine, ancient Israel, because it's a good, apparently it's a good place for wine, for producing wine, good for vine growing, right? So Jesus says, I am the vine and you are the branches, right? So Jesus uses the uh, wine grape metaphor frequently. And he has this story at the beginning of John chapter 2, where Jesus turns water into wine. And this has always fascinated me because I think that, John, the author of John, is telling this story in contrast to the Dionysus myth. And in part because the Dionysus myth was a story that was told throughout the Roman Empire, including in Palestine, in first century Palestine. It was big in a city called Tyre, which is also known in the Gospels, is talked about in the Gospels. It's in Galilee. I think it's about 40 miles from Nazareth. And the god Dionysus was a big, big deal in Tyre. And so when Jesus is traveling throughout the Galilee and going to Tyre and going to the Decapolis, which is a Greek word for the 10 cities, right? He's going to be hearing these stories. And so a lot of first century Jews are going to be familiar with these kinds of stories. So Dionysus is the god of wine. He's a child of Zeus and a human princess, Semele of Thebes. And Zeus's wife Hera becomes jealous of Semele and ends up getting Semele to have Zeus show up to Semele as in all of Zeus's divine glory, right? And this is not good for humans. Even in the Bible, right? No one can see God face to face and survive, except for a few people who end up actually doing that. So in the Bible, but Zeus shows himself in all of his divine glory to Semele, and Semele ends up dying while she's pregnant, and then Zeus uh, takes Dionysus out of uh, Semele's body. He's not ready to be born yet, and so Zeus puts him in his thigh until Zeus is ready to give birth to Dionysus. This is a weird story, man. These are weird, weird stories. But they're also kind of neat, kind of neat. So anyway, Dionysus ends up growing up and becomes cousins with the king of Thebes, a man named Pentheus. And Pentheus ends up getting jealous of Dionysus because Dionysus is a god and Pentheus is not a god. So Pentheus ends up talking some trash to Dionysus. Well, and Dionysus goes throughout the known world at the time, spreading around his cult of wine and defeating guys he doesn't like. And then he comes back to Thebes, and his cousin Pentheus is now king, and Pentheus starts throwing shade at Dionysus, starts talking trash to him and saying that he's not really a god, and starts questioning his parentage and saying that his mom was a whore and slept around, and so we don't know who Dionysus's true father is. Stuff like this, and then Pentheus ends up putting Dionysus in jail. Well, you can't keep a god down apparently, so Dionysus ends up breaking out of jail, and Dionysus, as he was going out throughout the world spreading his religion of wine around, ends up getting followers, female followers called the Maenads, and they follow him and they drink wine. And Dionysus is not just the god of wine, also the god of wine that makes people mad. Not angry mad, but like kind of crazy mad, right? They get in this religious frenzy as they worship Dionysus. And so Pentheus has another quality about him that is not so admirable, I don't think. He's a male chauvinist pig. He thinks that the place for women is in the house, is in the kitchen, right? So he's very patriarchal. Dionysus is like, hey, women, let's go out and party, right? So, so you have these two very contrasting views of the way the world is. Dionysus is a bit more relaxed, I guess, and Pentheus is way more traditional, way more patriarchal. So there are conflicts happening here. And so Dionysus is in jail. He breaks out of jail. He ends up pretending to be a priest. of Thebes, and he goes to his cousin and he gets him to go out and spy on the Maenads as they are out on the mountain worshiping Dionysus. And so Pentheus ends up going out there and spying on them, and the Maenads discover Pentheus and end up killing him. Not just the Maenads, but Agave is Pentheus's mother, and Agave has started worshiping Dionysus, and Agave is out there. She doesn't know what she's doing. She's under the spell of Dionysus and the wine, and she ends up seeing her son Pentheus and going to him, and she thinks that he is a mountain lion, and she takes him by the head and cuts off his head. Why am I laughing at this? I don't know. It's wild. Cuts off his head and brings his head back to the palace to her father, Pentheus's grandfather, and shows it to him. And over the next few minutes, she ends up coming back to herself and seeing that she is holding her son's head up in the air. And she thinks it's at first she thinks it's a mountain lion, and then she's like, "Oh crap, what have I done?" This is not good. She didn't mean to kill her son. She didn't want to kill her son, but this is the god of wine and the god of madness that is Dionysus, the god of wine. This mythical story. Oh man! And then you've got Jesus in the Gospel of John, chapter 2. And this background makes this story all the more interesting to me and all the more uh, reason to love it for me. So Dionysus is not just the god of wine making people drunk and making them mad. There are also some stories where Dionysus um, either actively or uh, in different ways is able to turn water into wine. Get where there's a fountain of water, there's now this fountain of wine because Dionysus has either walked past it or uh, in some cases just walks past it. In other cases, like calls it to turn into wine. So you get these miracle stories happening in palace in Greco-Roman myths, and these are stories that are being passed around all throughout the Roman Empire. So Jesus may have heard of it. The Jewish people may have heard of it. The early Christians may have heard of these stories, and so they tell their own story. And here is Jesus. It's early in John chapter 2, and there's a party happening at Cana, and the husband and the wife and their parents are supposed to be throwing this party, and it's supposed to have food and wine that doesn't run out for days. And all of a sudden, they're starting to run out of wine, and this is going to bring all kinds of shame to the beginning of their marriage, of their life together. And so somebody comes to Jesus, and Jesus hears his mother tells him that it's time for you to do this miracle, and Jesus says, "Ah, it's not my time yet." And Mary, Jesus's mother, uh, insists. She pushes him forward. Come on, Jesus, get to work here. So he ends up doing it and saving this couple from this shame that is about to be thrust upon them. And so he does that. It's the best wine that any of them have ever tasted. And this is Jesus and the God of wine, using wine in this miracle story not to kill someone, not to get revenge because he's been slighted by someone, but to keep the party going, to stop the cycle of shame from even starting against this couple. So here is the difference between these stories, right? And Jesus is so subversive of the spirit of the Dionysus story that at the end of his life, Jesus holds the Last Supper with his disciples, right? Where he shares his body and his blood as wine. And this is going back to the Genesis story This is Jesus enacting God in the world as the gift giver, the one who gives us food to eat, good drinks, water, wine, good drinks to have, keeps the party going, right? Even in the face of us killing God in our midst, right? In the Dionysus story, the god ends up killing in an act of revenge. In the Jesus story, the god of wine ends up feeding even those who would betray him. Even even Judas gets fed at the Last Supper. Do you see the radical difference between these stories? Jesus feeds even his Peter, James, John, the ones who abandon him. Even Judas gets fed, the one who betrays him. And as Jesus goes to the cross, it is humans who unite against him to put him on the cross. And he does not respond with violence and acts of revenge in return. He prays for God to not kill his enemies, but to forgive his enemies. Seen in the backdrop of the Dionysus story, for me, this is all the more powerful. Now, some people may be like, well, is this just the early Christians trying to tell in conversation with the Dionysus myth, trying to tell a different story? Could be, you know. Is this a literal event that happened in Cana in the first century where Jesus turns water into wine? I don't know. I'm enough of a mystic. I try to be enough of a mystic to believe that these miracles that Jesus performs could happen, and that he he is a conduit of what God is like in the world, of God in the world, and inviting us to be conduits of God's love and gift giving in the world as well. And so for me, I tend to believe that these events happened. But if you or anybody just can't get there, that's fine. It's fine with me. But what I want to invite you to think about maybe is whether or not these events literally happened. We are being invited to participate in these events today. And what do I mean by that? How do we live in a world where we can metaphorically produce create more water into wine? And what's the point of that story? It's not that Jesus performs some miracle turning water into wine. The point of the story is that he stops the cycle of shame from even starting. That's the true miracle in many of these stories. It's not like this magic trick that Jesus does uh, for the sake of magic tricks, right? It's it has a much more practical level to it. And that practical level is to stop the cycles of shame, to stop the cycles of hatred before they even start. And how do we participate in that today? How do we participate in the God of the creation story in Genesis chapter 1 that creates the world good, and how do we share that goodness with one another? Yeah, I mean, you've heard that there's enough food in this world to end hunger if we just share. That's like the key to all of the Bible is just share of what you have, right? I mean, this is when when the Israelites are leaving Egypt and God says, hey, just one thing, just I'm going to give you food, I'm going to give you bread, just I'm going to give you meat, just one thing though, just share it. And they don't. They end up not trusting in the gifts that God has given them, and they hoard it for themselves, and all of a sudden the food is spoiled and their relationships have spoiled too. So share the wine. That's what Jesus does at the Last Supper, which is not really the Last Supper because Luke tells the story on the road to Emmaus, where Jesus in the resurrection continues to eat continues to share bread and wine with his disciples. And I just love that. I love it. I love those resurrection stories. Um, so how's that? Okay. Well, let's see. Let's go to comments and questions. Yes, the mermaids, Jessica. Thank you. Hi, Melanie. Good to see you. Let's see. Joshua, good to see you. Good to see you. Indeed, Pastor Adam, I am overjoyed that mankind has evolved enough consciousness to remember its origins, allow for empathy, reciprocity, and compassion. That's good stuff. Understanding that we are direct descendants of God is radical understanding. We are finally remembering our benevolent ancestors. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah. If only we could live into that benevolence, right? That's I think the key. Hi, Lita. Good to see you. Joshua says when individuals personalize, yeah, the Bible, their private darkness is transmitted via their attitude and constant bodily harm, in my opinion. Oh yeah, I mentioned like the projection of our own evil tendencies onto others and how we see that a lot these days. But also, Joshua, as you are saying, we project our own evil tendencies onto the Bible as well. That kind of blinds us. I think that's the shroud that I was mentioning earlier that Isaiah was getting at, where in Isaiah 25, where everybody's going to come to God's mountain, and the shroud, basically the sheet that covers our eyes and blinds us our to seeing the image of God in one another is going to be destroyed. And that darkness that Joshua you're talking about that we transmit is going to be destroyed. Then Joshua says, Raka, those in need of a shepherd are carried away by the darkness. So may we not be carried away. Jenny says, I've written and helped people in prison for a long time now. Oh, you do great work, Jenny. And the biggest lesson I've had to learn as someone who lost a loved one to an act of violence is that people have both the capacity for doing evil and good in them. It's easier for most of the population here to pretend people are all one or the other, to point the finger and give up on loving the neighbors who need it the most. We'll never be better until we're willing to see ourselves in the people we discard. Oh, Jenny. Can I get an amen? Amen to that, Jenny. Beautiful, beautiful. Joshua says, I enjoy wine despite the fact that I cannot drink it. Oh, unfortunately, one glass of wine equals one bottle of wine for me. Dionysus is my distant cousin. I just know it. Joshua, well, I am a DJ, and you are correct about the frenzy of love that develops when dancing and drinking wine. I'm curious if Jesus would venture onto the dance floor. I think he would. I think that Jesus would enjoy the dance floor. He probably danced at the wedding at Cana, I would guess. Yeah, he liked to party. We know he liked to party with all kinds of folks. So I think it's good. Incidentally, we had this song at our on campus worship service this last week, and I threatened to dance during it, and I did, and that was a bad decision. Jesus, the Son of God, is probably a better dancer than I am. And afterwards, I was like, I should have made a joke, like, who's going to pay the pastor to get dancing lessons? Okay, who's going to fund that? So, Jeff, if you're watching, we need a pastor dancing fund. Clearly. Oh, that's funny. Awesome. Awesome. Okay. We've got some amens. Thank you, Lita and Jessica, for that. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you for being here for this episode. Thank you for your comments and your questions. I think we'll do this again next Thursday at 11 o'clock here on the Clackamas United Church of Christ Facebook page and the Pastor Adam Facebook page. If you want to keep up with One Question with Pastor Adam, I do post these videos also on my Pastor Adam YouTube channel. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, thank you so much. Appreciate you. You can listen to this on iTunes, Podbean, Pods, whatever, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you are listening to one where you can rate and review, would appreciate that. And if you want to share this episode with anybody you think might be interested, that would be awesome too. Like and subscribe if you can. And thank you, everybody. I hope that you have a great rest of the day. One Question with Pastor Adam is a product of the Raven Foundation, where we seek to explore religion and nonviolence. And so go check out the Raven Foundation if you'd like. And everybody, hope you have a great rest of the day. And until next time, God be with you.